Hey, cool kids. Welcome back into the Cool Grandpa podcast. I am happy you are joining me this week. This week's guest is Kepler Knott. Now, Kepler is the author, and I'm holding up the book, Raising Tomorrow Talks to Prepare Our Kids for What Lie Ahead. You guys are going to really enjoy this perspective because it's written for a father who's trying to give some words of guidance and counsel to his daughters, but then has also broadened that out so that it's very applicable whether you have sons, grandsons, granddaughters, daughters, nieces, nephews, whatever it is. If there are kids in your life that you care about, you are going to want to get this book. Again, it's called Raising Tomorrow Talks to Prepare Our Kids for What Lies Ahead. So we are going to get into this. We have a blast talking to each other, especially about our ages and how we grew up, and our moms with the wooden spoons that will still give us a good whack when we deserve it. But before we jump into this conversation, I want to remind you, I've got about another week that all the merchandise on the Cool Grandpa podcast is 30% off. So if you've been thinking about getting a set of tumblers, a ball cap, a polo shirt, a mouse pad, whatever I've got over in the merchandise, go check that out, because in about another week, that 30% off is going away. The other thing I'd like to tell you about is I've got a program set up at Buy Me a Coffee. It's a great way to support the show. You can give me a $5 donation or more than that if you're feeling extra generous. It's a way that helps offset the cost of putting out the podcast every week. You know, there's subscription costs, there's some behind the scenes things that go on. So any contribution, any support to the podcast is more than welcome. And it's a great way for you to talk about the Cool Grandpa podcast with your friends and family when you discuss your generosity. So without further ado, let's jump into this conversation with Kepler. Hi, Kepler. Welcome to the Cool Grandpa podcast. I'm excited to have you on to talk about your book, Raising Tomorrow. This is going to be an awesome conversation, and we've already been talking a little bit. What I'd love for you to do is help us get to know you a little bit more, but then let's dive into why you felt compelled to write this book.
Sure. Well, first of all, Greg, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll answer the introduction part, I guess, in a couple ways. So personally, my name is Kepler Knott. I'm 56. I'm married with two daughters, both in middle school. I'm the author of Raising Tomorrow, Talks to Prepare Our Kids for What Lies Ahead. And I've been fortunate, or just maybe by virtue of age, to have worn a lot of hats: writer, teacher, soldier. I was a tech entrepreneur for a while, but most importantly, a husband and a dad. And I definitely look forward to the possibility of being a grandfather one day, though I'm not in a rush. I do, however, have several friends who are, and some of the things that are shared in this book that show up in the book are definitely from them. So I started this book as a series of letters on different topics to my kids. And it wasn't designed to be a book. I had shared those letters with a number of other parents and friends and family, and they're like, it looks like a book. And I did want my kids to have a fun and flexible playbook of sorts for things to think about, possible points of view, food for thought, if you will. I call it Life's Heavy Topics Lightly Roasted, as the website says, but it's on things that all of us have to think about. But as you grow up, school, money, religion, meaning, technology, all these things, service. We were talking about military service a few minutes ago before we started the podcast. So I feel like I'm always learning, and that some ways of living are better than others to make life full. And so this book has as many questions as it does answers, but it aims to impart some of what I think I've discovered and invite other parents and their kids to do the same. Socially, or sort of societally speaking, just for a moment, I think younger people today, all of us perhaps, but they can get overwhelmed with growing up. It's a lifelong process. It seems to be happening in some ways more slowly than it did before. And that might just be an old person's perspective, but it's also can be a lot more intense. And I'm sure we'll talk about that. But highest rates of depression in America are among kids 18 to 24. And I know when you're 24, you're not a kid, but you kind of are. And 2/3 of parents say their job is harder than ever. So I'm sure there may or may not be a correlation there in both directions. But I think for a lot of them, growing up can feel like a sinking ship to some of these kids, and it's not. So, as our kids grow up, they've got to learn to be citizens, leaders, followers, colleagues, friends, neighbors, partners, and so many other roles that we have to play. So this book is about connecting parents and grandparents too, and kids to inspire the next generations. I find, by the way, that grandparents are wonderful in helping kids with this journey. And our kids, as we were talking about before, have been very lucky to have had their grandparents around. So that's a little bit about what I did and why I did it. Mission accomplished. My kids have already read the book. And when they ask me questions, I'm like, well, you should go read this chapter. We'll talk about it, that kind of thing. So it's a useful interactive tool more than just something, it breaks up each chapter sort of self-contained, and it's useful for our ADHD world to be able to focus on one thing at a time.
Well, first, I can tell you that as somebody that's 56 as well, when I get a little sassy, my mom still uses all my names, and I do get threatened with a wooden spoon.
My mom had a wooden spoon with holes in it. It whistled when it went through the air. I still say yes, ma'am, and no, sir. I mean, that's just we're from being from the South. That's probably kind of how it is. But yeah, no, it's yes. I understand what you're saying.
So even 24-year-olds might still be kids, and 56-year-olds to our
all
parents,
relative.
we're still kids. So
it's all relative.
One of the things I really liked is how you laid out this book almost as a primer. Like, I didn't feel like you need to jump and read every chapter, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. What I loved about it was that each one of these things, if you feel like a topic's coming up in your relationship with your kids, this is a great way to read and get somebody else's ideas and then prepare yourself for that conversation.
Yeah, I wrote as much not for my own sake, but kids are smart and they ask lots of questions. It's cliche, but why, right? From the age of 2 onward, and so it helped. It was a forcing function for me to organize my own thinking. It's not saying I'm right, but it's like, okay, if this is what we're talking about, this is my perspective. This is what I know. This is what I don't know, and what do you know, and what are you going to have to do about it? Because things are changing so quickly. Just again, at a societal level, that I think these are good conversations to have with our kids and our grandkids.
Absolutely. And it's laid out perfectly that if my kids are starting to take anything, working on a finance merit badge or an accounting merit badge,
right,
you've got a section in here talking about both technology as well as money and how to broach that. But I want to get into, I loved the first chapter really hit home. And to me, the first chapter is really the meaning that you have. You definitely have a chapter before that, but meaning to me, and you really called out that you think and you want younger generations to know that adaptation is probably the key for transitioning and moving through life. And I wanted to understand a little bit more about where your heart was with that as you're writing it, and then why do you think adaptation is such an important skill set?
So you're right. It is the first chapter of the book after the introduction, which sort of lays it out. People can download pieces of that off the website. There's a quote that opens up that chapter, which is called "On Meaning." Everything's on fill in the blank, right? And it goes like this: "The universe is under no obligation to make sense to you." From Neil deGrasse Tyson, right, astrophysicist. So when I think about adaptation, one of the corollaries, or another word I would use is resilience and the ability to persevere. There's a side story to that that's mentioned in the book about outward bound. I did that. My wife did that. I was in the military. That's sort of its own outward bound experience. But the rites of passage are really important. And it seems that we don't have as many of them as we once did. And the quick story on outward bound, at least part of the story as it was told to me, is at the turn of the last century, German U-boats were sinking cruise liners and people were going in the water. And the people that were perishing were the young people. I don't mean like 5-year-olds. I mean like 25-year-olds. And the people that were surviving were the older folks. And so there was a message in there about, hey, how do I learn how to not give up? How do I learn how to persevere? And so through actions like that and rites of passage, kids learn to adapt. And the reason I think that's so vital is because the pace of change is maddening, probably for all of us. And kids don't know any better, kind of thing. I mean, my daughter was swiping the television when she was 2, but there's more information, more choices to make, more noise, and more challenges. And getting a firm footing on your own attention and our own selves to be able to be stable as we go forward is really important. So cultivating that mindset is critical. And I tell my kids, hey, despite the instant gratification that's become part of our world, Amazon, Facebook likes, whatever. Most things in life that are rich and rewarding take time, and they take focus, and they take energy. And I want you to stick with those things, find them for yourself and stick with them so that you can find that. And, that's everybody's individual journey and responsibility, but it is a distracting world we live
Absolutely. And I think to your point, I think being able to have a little bit of a flexibility of mindset as well as your surroundings gets to be important because events happen to us, but oftentimes we're judged and the outcome is based upon our reaction to it.
right? Yeah, in the chapter on work, what am I going to do when I grow up? You spend 80,000 hours of your life doing something, right? So make it worthwhile. There's a list of things in there that, per some of the research I did and talking to the parents, and a lot of those things are not hard skills, although those are important. If you're going to a heart surgeon, obviously he or she needs to know how to do heart surgery. But they're qualities of character or personality or effort that no matter what job or occupation you find yourself in, and kids are much more likely today to not just change jobs, but change careers multiple times in their lives because that's how fast things are changing. And so having those things that follow you and support you throughout that whole journey, that whole process becomes even more important than I think it was in my generation or generation before.
Absolutely. I think we want those people that can have the both hard skill set and soft skill set that when things change, a project, direction of a company, whatever, that you can take what you have and be able to apply it somewhere else. One of the things that this really led me into was when you were also talking about values and how it's important for kids to really develop a set of values. And it could be on roles, religion plays a part of that, philosophy, family. But how do you feel about and how do you coach up kids to get to their own value system?
Yeah, I think when you're younger and maybe throughout your life, you absorb the values that are around you. So that just speaks to the obvious, which is how important it is for parents and grandparents and those that, coaches, teachers, et cetera. How do you model good behavior, not just talk about it, right? And while I'm not formally religious, I grew up in a fairly moderate Presbyterian home. I appreciate the aims of religion, which it's the way by which many of us make sense of the world. Religion and philosophy, they ask and answer really important questions. Where do we come from? Why are we here? What's really important in life versus all the other and increasingly quote unquote urgent things that mount up. But when things get hard, and they will for all of us in our lives, you have to have a bedrock of values to help guide you. Life is suffering, so says the Buddha, right? Or it can be. So being ready for that really stems from the core values. The book itself has a chapter on religion and values. I borrowed a set of values, many of which are my own, and none of which we'd probably debate, but from a grandfather of a close family friend of ours. And they're called BP's 10 Commandments. And it's the 10 Commandments as you might recognize them in the Judeo-Christian tradition, but there's more. It's be truthful, not just don't lie, but be truthful. It's bigger than not lying. Be curious, be kind, be forgiving, be courageous, both morally and physically. So those are the kinds of things that, our kids have read it. That's just that's 10% of it. Another 90% is watching it and experiencing it and trying it. And that's a lifelong process again for all of us. But that's the kind of stuff that we try to impress upon our kids because as the hands come off the wheel, which they do sooner and sooner, they're on their own. I don't mean that in an existential way, although that can be the case too sometimes. But knowing what your values are matters as you make your way through life, serve others, and really find happiness. Although I tell my kids, hey, there's a difference between being happy and being content. Because you're not always going to be happy. Don't think that way. But being content comes from knowing and living by and upholding values that you've set down for yourself because you know that you're doing the best that you can. So that's the kind of stuff that we talk about in the book, that we talk about with our kids, and I'm sure that resonates with anybody who has kids or grandkids.
Absolutely. And I'm a father of two boys, so I didn't have to deal with girls. Most of my stuff with the boys was don't be dumb.
Right.
And that covers a lot of stuff.
Or if they're really quiet upstairs and you don't hear anything, you better go check on them.
Absolutely. How do you, as a father, kind of navigate when the young women and daughters start to push against some of the values and really as they're exploring their own set, right? Because we want everybody to be happy, functioning adults who incorporate and have a value system that's not just pushed onto them, but something that they really internalize so that guides them in their future.
Yeah, and you're not talking about like how do I how do I prepare my girls to deal with the world of boys? Or are you just talking about and values in general?
Values in general. We'll get to
Yeah.
boys in a minute.
Yeah. So I think you're right. Something you said earlier about, look, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. So I think we're going to talk about this some too, but there's a lot of helicopter parenting. I've done it myself. It's just more prevalent in today's world. But, if you fall down and skin your knee and get rescued every time, then you don't learn. Well, same with values. Like if you make a poor moral choice, which we all do at times, and you don't suffer the consequences for that, you don't learn from that, and someone's there to rescue you or hold your hand overly, then that's not helping. So we try to balance we know they're dependent on us, but there's an interdependence and really an independence that we're striving for. And, it comes when it comes, and every child's different and every child matures at a different rate. But having them think through and make those decisions for themselves instead of us telling them, which sounds really simple, but it's easy to do as a parent. Busy parents, I think I know at least the right answer. Let me tell you, that doesn't serve them well. So, our kids get exposed to so many more things than we realize, whether it's digital or physical or otherwise. And the best thing that I think we can do for them is to model what right looks like. I tell my kids stuff all the time and they call BS on. They're like, well, that's not what you did. And sometimes they're right. So helping our kids to be better by doing better ourselves. I mean, few things in life I think make you a better person than being a parent if you're trying, and probably even more so a grandparent who have even more wisdom and more experience. And so, doing what's showing them by doing, I think is one of a big thing in our house. We try to do that. I'm sure lots of parents do. It's hard sometimes, but that's how they're going to learn and make the choice to be this way and not that way, or do this thing and not that thing, because we won't be there for them all the time. Obviously, none of us.
Right. Well, and I think you hit on something too, where it's important to realize that, both the younger kids, middle school, high school, and so forth, at times they're going to make hopefully non fatal errors and they'll learn from it. Right.
Yep. Well, I mean, even little things like we were talking about helicopter parenting. So, I mean, for example, in the book, I talk about, I did some research. At what age do parents let their kids do things independently? At what age do they get to stay at home? At what age do they play outside in front of the house? At what age do they play at the public park? And I was shocked. It was like, oh, you got to be 12 years old before you can stay at home. I'm like, really? Like, oh, wow. Here comes social services for my house, because we're like, hey, here's the key. Don't unlock the door. Don't set the house on fire, when they were 8. But my larger point is that putting them in safe places, relatively speaking, to exercise that independence, not just of action, but firstly of judgment, I think is really important for us to do as parents. And I have to remind myself of that all the time.
Well, and to your point, I think if we can give them a little bit of responsibility, independence, and the ability to make value decisions early and things come out well, that congratulations, and that, hey, they're starting to accumulate trust credits with
Yep.
mom and dad and
Yep.
grandpa and grandma.
And in their own judgment for themselves. Absolutely.
Right. Right. And some of this I want to now dive into is talking and helping girls understand and young women navigate coexisting with boys. And, like I said, I'm glad I didn't have girls, because they would have been in a castle high up in the Swiss Alps, and maybe they would get out when they're 35.
Right.
But how do you do that? And how can grandfathers
First of
help?
all, the real answer is I don't know. But what do we do about that? And what do I do about that as a father in particular? So going back to philosophy, Plato once said that of all the animals, the boy is the most unmanageable. And of all the chapters that I wrote, the one that I felt the most uniquely qualified through no effort of my own was for them to know a little bit more about the species of boys, and for that to be useful to my own girls. So for my girls, or what I really want them to think about is, how can you give and get the most out of your relationships with the opposite sex, with boys, and specifically, obviously, in the category of romance or loving companionship. And, the book lists out traits of boys, and they're tongue in cheek somewhat, but they're not untrue. They're good and bad varietals of each trait: competitiveness, desire to provide and protect, ego, pride, communication skills or lack thereof. Women speak an average of 7,000 words a day, men about 2,000, not 2 words, although it depends on the man, I'm sure. And so, and then not to mention just the libido, right? There's polite ways to talk about that. And I'm sure there are no special nonprofits or awareness groups for how to help men cope with ceaseless perpetual sexual desire. But I tell my girls, like, that's a real thing. So when you're 14, boys used to hit you when you were 5, and now they act differently when they're 14. It's the same boy. Look, the affection, love, and care of a romantic partner is a wonderful thing, one of life's great rewards. I just say, look, you got to learn to pay attention, enjoy a boy's companionship responsibly, and treat people the way that you would like to be treated, and you'll have a good approach to boys. There's a chapter that follows that or is nearby on violence. No one ever has a right to tell you to do something or coerce you to do something you don't want to do. So there's a lot of fatherly parenting advice. I joke with my kids that, there's a reason they talk about your dad sitting at home in a rocking chair with a shotgun. But if I'm that worried about my girls, I'm not going to be on the front porch. So, but it is hard. My girls are still at the stage of like, ooh, I don't know about that, but it will arrive soon enough. And I think it takes a lot of not ego suppression, but self-management on the part of fathers. Because again, what that 14-year-old, 18-year-old boy mind is like, how it's structured. The operating system is fueled on hormones, not on logic. And so there's a responsible way to manage that on their part. When they leave the house, that's going to be their job. But you can model that at home, certainly. So we're pretty traditional that way, relatively speaking, I think. But we'll see. So far, so good.
Yeah. No, well, and I think it's an ever-changing target too. So not only do you have personalities, you also have just what cultural norms are going on at the times. How do you think grandfathers can help out? And I'm asking because I've got 2 granddaughters, and apparently locking them up in a castle in Switzerland is not
allowed.
Yeah, so
not allowed. So my kids are not yet adults, although they can act that way, good ways and bad sometimes. And we talk about parents versus grandparents, let's say, being especially helicopterish. I think that, we talked about this before we started the call. There is a magic in being a grandparent. And there's this old cliche that you get them for a while and then you give them back. But what I really find is that our girls, both from their grandfather and their grandmothers, listen to and hear things that grandparents have to say in ways that they would never hear them from their parents. And part of that is likely due to experience and patience and wisdom and understanding that I think grandparents have, no matter what their age, and they can tap into in ways that they might not have even had themselves as parents. So you had a podcast on your show where the big mantra was, hey, if you're a grandparent, make sure you support the parents. I agree with that. But I also think grandparents, again, have this special and unique ability because of where they sit in the family tree to bestow upon their grandchildren, their children's children, a lot of wisdom and experience. And my perspective is that as parents, at some point, we realize we're not creating human beings. We're just there as a mirror and a guide to help children become more of who they authentically are. And I think grandparents are especially wonderful in that capacity because they're less judgy. They're less into, they might ask you how you're doing in school, but they don't care what your grades are. They do, right? But that's not their role. So there's a lot of value, whether you're talking a grandfather talking to a granddaughter about boys, or whether you're talking about any other of the issues that as adults we think are ho-hum, but that in the lives of kids are a huge deal. I think grandparents play a huge role.
Well, and I appreciate that because I think it validates a little bit of what I've been learning in that grandfather, granddaughter, grandson relationship can be different because you don't necessarily have the same tensions you do with a parent that you see every day, that you wake up.
I agree.
And so, and we were talking
less on the line, kind of, right? But more in a way, but you just don't know it.
Right. Because we're not as emotionally charged typically as a mom or a dad that also
calmer.
Well, because we all have that baggage, right? Like if we had to live with the employees and the people we work with, they would not be our work buddies.
Right.
And unfortunately our kids don't necessarily get that break.
That's right.
So I think that's where we get that having a little bit of distance, whether you're down the road or across the street or across the country. To your point, it gives your perspective and your input maybe a little bit different weight than it does. Not greater or less than, but just different.
Well, I think kids, they don't feel like they're being policed by their grandparents. It is like the highest form of unconditional love. And when that exists and you have that sense that it exists, then all things are possible. And so my mother and my dad, before he passed, could say things again and do things with our kids that we just wouldn't get away with. I don't mean that in a bad way, but our kids wouldn't cop to it. But I will often call my mother and say, hey, this is what's going on with this child or that child. This is what I'm doing. First of all, what do you think? Because she's still my mom. And secondly, hey, if it suits you and the temperature feels right, have a conversation about it. Inevitably, she always does, and inevitably, it gets better. And that, I mean, the amount of grace and like gratitude that I have, that I feel for that is insane. It's been a huge blessing. Yeah. And again, I didn't grow up that way. I wasn't deprived of anything too badly, but I wasn't around my extended family in the way that my kids are. So I hope if this is a show, the Cool Grandpa podcast, just the importance and the vital connection that grandparents play with their grandchildren is not to be understated.
Well, thank you for that. And I, of course, as the Cool Grandpa podcast,
You're going to say for sure.
Support that. Hey, I do want us to shift gears. Both you and I have got some technology background in different ways, but being of the same age, we remember when green screens and those AS400 systems came out, right?
Right.
We remember when cable was a new thing to the neighborhood. Atari cartridges, and then it moved over to CD-ROMs, and then it moved over. And technology, and I forget the theorem about the like doubling of technology every so many years.
Yeah.
I wish I remembered that guy's name.
You're not talking about Occam's rate. It's I don't know. Yeah, sorry.
I think it was a guy that worked for IBM back in the 50s or whatever, and it was like, hey, if we can do 56 megabytes,
right,
then a year from now we should be able to do twice that, and then it'll be twice,
Or the old Bill Gates quote that things don't change as much as you think they will in every 2 years, but they change so much more than you think they will every 10 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's perfect setup for us, because with the rapid onset of technology like we're seeing, because we're not seeing the gradual technology. I think we would say it was gradual. Our parents and grandparents probably thought it was revolutionary. But we're getting into all this AI and cryptocurrencies and all these different things. And how do we lead our sons and daughters when we've never really experienced this rate of change before ourselves?
Yeah, our primate brains aren't ready for it, whether you're an adult or a child. Back to our philosophy talk, I think it was Thoreau that once said, most of us lead lives of quiet desperation, but really many of us lead lives of constant distraction. And so I asked my kids, do you run technology or does it run you? From your smartphone to social media to AI, and AI is its own topic, a chapter on technology. But the need and search for objective truth, just to make one point that matters here, has never been harder, I think, ironically, given all the access to information that we have. I mean, like you said, back when we were kids, there were 5 network channels and landlines. And now, again, my daughter swipes the TV at age 4, and 90% of kids in the U.S. have phones at the beginning of adolescence. I'm sure you've read and talk about like books by Jonathan Haidt and things like that. Like, get rid of it. Like, our kids don't have phones in school. They're not allowed. That's a good thing. All the parents support that. But it really is a battle for our attention and groundedness. I remember I was actually writing the chapter on technology. I was in the library and I was looking out. It's a beautiful library that we have over the parking lot. And a mother was walking with her daughter and had her hand through the rows of cars. And as she was doing that, she was on her phone. And unconsciously, she let go. That child was probably 3 years old. And when she got to her car, she was still on her phone, and she turned around, and the kid was still standing in the middle of the parking lot. And it was like this huge metaphor, right? And it happens to kids, it happens to adults. And then there's the social media part of it, which is gossip has already been there, but it's been weaponized or amplified by social media, and keeping up with the Joneses and having the perfect life and the bullying. That all gets diminished with less phone. Kids spend hours a day on their devices, and they've forgotten how to talk face to face each other. It's amazing to watch teenage kids invite each other to a dance or do something, and they'll text each other when they could just like get up and go talk in the other room. My kids ask me what's for dinner on the phone. I'm like, no. You come downstairs and we'll talk about it. And I tell my kids, look, there's a real difference between networks and real human connection. I don't care how many friends you have on fill in the blank app. And ironically, I think loneliness seems like it's at an all time high, especially for young people, despite all the quote unquote connections. You probably be able to speak to AI, artificial intelligence, better than I. It's a massive topic, lots of possible scenarios. I think it's as dangerous as nuclear weapons, but it also holds great promise. But at the end of the day, I think so many of the issues come down to human understanding and judgment, and nothing as of yet is replacing that and getting us all aligned there. So I just tell my kids, look, your time and your attention are the most valuable things on the planet. You know this from all the ads that you see on whatever apps you're on. But because of that, use it wisely. And so that's a daily exercise process of reminding oneself, one's kids, etc. But it is tough. Go outside, get off your device, move around, put them down at night. Our kids have to turn all their electronics in by a certain hour, and they have to be down on their own without any. They can read a book. I don't care if you stay up till 2 a.m. reading a book. That's not going to happen. They fall asleep. But get settled in, and don't do it to yourself in the morning either. And so bookending your day with non-digitally, I think has been very helpful for them. And then they don't do social media. That's especially girls. You're talking about boys and girls, and I mean, girls are vicious, can be on social media. So we help them avoid that. If they want to talk to each other face to face like that, that's fine, but not over an app.
Right. And I've got that book. I want to say it's the like Distracted Child. I'll find it and I'll put it in the show notes, folks. But this is a book that did a deep dive on all the statistics. And you see where, like, I think it was around 2014 when Facebook started putting the like and the thumbs up and all that stuff, the increase of teen suicides and young girls cutting themselves, and all these different things. He goes through and documents that, hey, when this started, here's what was
Oh,
going, here's what followed some of that.
yeah. So in that chapter on technology and others, there's a lot of statistics. I find that sharing them on a podcast often sort of causes eyes to glaze over. But I'm glad you mentioned that book. There's a lot of books referenced, and they're all footnoted, and you can link it in the digital version. But there's a lot to learn, but you get the gist of it pretty quickly, like you said, just from things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, we don't want anybody getting glassy eyed and running off the road while they're listening to this. So we're going to stay kind of technology, but I know you've got a chapter and you talk about finances and you talk about that. With this world moving towards digital currency, gift cards, cryptocurrencies, how has the discussion in education around money changed? When we were growing up, you had actual dollars
Right.
and you had coins. And now, you get places where it's like, hey, we're only taking cards. We're only doing this. So you don't have the psychological pain of this is my last
Separating with your money.
$5. Right.
Yeah.
Or watching the piggy bank grow, right?
You mentioned that before, and so a couple things. So there is a chapter on money, and there's also a chapter on work, and those two things are related. I remember when I was in school, when we were in school, you had to take accounting. There was home ec. I'm not sure how prevalent that is anymore. There are a lot of life skills that I think have been chucked out, baby with the bathwater kind of thing, and I think that's probably a mistake. I do think the discussion on money varies widely depending on where you come from and what your means are and how you're raised. I'm not sure, and I could be wrong. I'm not sure if feeling the dollars and coins is so vital. If I tell my kids that I put $10 in their account for washing the car, that's good enough for them. But to your point, when I was little, I'd be like, no, 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 no. Like, I want to see the $10.
Right. I want.
Um, and I do think, to your point, that the swipe of a card or a phone even makes it less real for them in some ways. And we tell our kids, money's a form of stored energy. It's also a lot like oxygen. If you take it for granted until you don't have enough, and money as a thing has only been around for a couple 100,000 years versus the whole human species. But at the end of the day, I also tell them, hey, look, money doesn't buy you happiness, but it does make a lot of real problems go away. And I know your question is more like, how do you teach them to value what it is they're spending? I make them bring me receipts. If they're buying something that's like a gift for a friend, that's either their money or we split it. And so there's an exchange between the parent and the child so that there's an accountability. And then there's just the grander concept of money. It's interesting to note, speaking of statistics, there's a little research on this in the book, that once you get to a certain point, there's no correlation between wealth and happiness. There's a fair amount of data that points to that, which again doesn't mean you don't need a baseline. That's a whole different conversation. In our family, our kids, they get an allowance, they have chores. We manage that process that way. So there's a reckoning, an accounting, a ledger for that, if you will. And it's, our kids don't have digital currency yet. We give them cash. Every now and then I'll give them my credit card if I'm doing something and like, hey, run in the store and do this. But they do have bank accounts. And one of them will come to me regularly and say, well, can I go look at my bank account? Because we'll put their allowance in there. The other one could care less. And I think some of that just comes down to age and the child. But teaching them to manage it and to know that battery, that storage of energy is not limitless is you're right, is a very important thing. I think it's just harder because it feels ethereal, right? It's over here, it's over there, especially when it's your parents' money, right? So reminding them every now and then with some cost of their own has been an important part of their upbringing.
I love that. Yeah, to your point, when you're not, because I remember in school, at least in seventh grade, maybe, we did have as part of our math doing like how to balance a checking account.
Yeah,
A simple one, your debits and your credits,
right.
right? How to write out a check, even how to do some of those. They weren't taking over for mom and dad, but it was like, hey, here, we're going to focus on this. And this is, you have $100, you spend $105. What do you have? Oh,
Yep.
you're overdrawn and
Yep.
all these things.
We talk about the physics of life of my family, and money is a part of that. Like, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Everything has a cost, and energy, and time, and money, and effort. Nothing is for free. Zero. So when somebody says, I got something for you and it's free, don't believe it. It may be obvious what the trade off is, or it may not be. And I think that's harder today than it was before as well. So it's a good point.
Yeah. And Kepler, we've been on for a little while. And as we start to wrap this up, I do want to get your thoughts and feelings and ideas about what is parenting like in today's environment versus maybe when we were growing up, or even some of us that had kids in the 90s and the very early 2000s, that maybe grandparents or other parents don't necessarily appreciate or really understand.
I think we talked about some of these things. Again, my kids are not yet grown up, and so I'm not yet a grandparent. But to think about when we grew up and my parents and the two of us as parents, one of my key observations we already touched on is I just think that we're a lot more helicopterish than we used to be as a group. And that, again, may vary by subculture and demographic in the US, but kids get a lot more scrutiny than they used to. Grandparents are wonderful at not doing that because kids pay attention to it, right? And it's not always good for them, even though it can feel good to the parents. So this topic of overparing and not letting kids learn for themselves, I think is a very real one. And grandparents are especially well suited to instruct on that. And that's a thing, a very real thing in many segments of US society. So I said before, I think how we help raise our kids has a lot more to do with how we behave than what we say, because so many things are getting said to them from school, by digitally, et cetera. So it's a show, don't tell sport. And again, grandparents are in a special place to exhibit that. I wish my kids, I'd be interested in what you think about this, but I wish they had more time to be bored, to be with themselves and their own thoughts. We try to make space for that. We don't always succeed. And sometimes because they want to be busy, but other times we do it. I also think, and this is probably more for parents than grandparents, because I think grandparents have figured this out maybe, but I think it's important to remember that parents have their own lives and relationships with each other. And it's not just all about the kids. And that's good for their kids to see. It doesn't mean you're not loved or cared for, but this is our time, not your time. And the book talks about all those things. There's a comment in the book or quote, why and how did my parents mess me up? And then why and how did my parents help me grow up? And bear in mind that those two things could be related because most of us are doing the best that we can. And grandparents have a wonderful way of like making a point in an implied way. The parents like, oh yeah, I probably shouldn't like get so exercised about the fact that so-and-so didn't eat all their mac and cheese or whatever. Right. But there's a lot of things that are probably as true today as they were back then. And some things that aren't, or that feel different. And so that linkage, that connection from generation to generation to generation reminds us of like what's important, not just urgent, and what really matters. And I think a lot of that can come into parents learning from their parents about how to parent, and also kids learning from grandparents.
Oh, I love that. I used to joke as I was raising my sons that, I hope I screw them up in new and unique ways so that they at least have something new for their therapist down the road.
Right.
Right.
You got to create a market.
Exactly. Well, because I could be at times be as short as anybody else, and at
Sure.
times I could look
You
the
go to
other
work for 10
way,
hours or
you
more and you
know.
come home and they're like, hey, I want to, you're like, listen,
But it was, yeah, we would joke around with that, like, hey, I want you to have something completely different. But
I love it.
and the other part too, where I think some of this goes well with your book, is I've been thinking in terms of, and I was reading some historical fiction, and I love history. But when you would travel from, let's say, Virginia to Boston, let's say, right? A couple hundred years ago, that's going to take a couple of weeks if you're on a wagon, or a good week. During that time, you have time to think about a Bible verse, something Marcus Aurelius said, something. And I think sometimes we struggle with being able to take that in and process it, and the old expression, noodle it around a little bit, because
Yeah.
everything's so instant.
To be with your own thoughts, not to be bored, but to have space to do that. Absolutely.
And then create your own, okay, well, this is my thought on this, and to really have those discussions. And I think parents that are engaged can find that. And that's one reason too, I always love when I hear parents talk about hiking trips and fishing trips,
Yeah.
because those are the perfect times to
Camping
sit
trips.
there.
We've done some
Camping
camping trips.
trips. It's the perfect time to sit around and talk about everything and nothing at the same time.
That's exactly right.
So as we wrap this up, any thoughts that you have on, fathers going through and discussing with their children these ideas that you have in your book, Raising Tomorrow, as well as grandfathers, that maybe we hadn't hit on, but something that maybe struck you during our conversation? And I'll hold the book up while you're talking a little bit so people can see.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, any book that gets put in front of you that purports to have all the right answers, you should automatically be suspicious of. But as I think I mentioned before, the book is about raising tomorrow, but it's about raising questions. And there are questions that we all have to answer. And we get help answering them or asking them when we're younger, and less help as we get older. And so the book really, at least I tried to set all those out on the table. And the answers change. When my kids were, the book was in some small way inspired by my doctor who had three daughters. And when they were 7, 8, and 10, Dad, you're the greatest. When they're, 16, 17, 19, Dad, you're so lame. He's like, I'm the same dad and you're a different kid. So we all change. So my kid's perspective on work or money or religion or meaning or technology or education and learning, that's going to change too. But the questions remain, and they are the same. Like, what's it all about? Why is it important? How much of myself shouldn't give to this? What are the trade-offs in this or that decision? And so that, again, that mindset that you talked about at the beginning of our conversation becomes really, really important. That's really what the book is trying to do. It's a playbook for that. And so every parent has their own unique wisdom and relationship, certainly with their own kids. And this book tries to uncover that, not to supplant it. And so I think that's why it's, the book, as a series of letters, it was pretty personal, and it got converted into third party speak over quite a period of time. And so it's meant to be accessible by parents and kids. It's not a book for parents, and it's not a book just for kids. It's a book for conversation, and inside of those conversations, like as if you were going fishing or camping or hiking, that inspires sort of the types of minor transformations that over time lead to whoever that person's going to become as they get older.
Well, and I would tag on to that too, grandparents.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pick this thing up. We've got millions of grandparents that are raising grandchildren because of one thing or another. And some of us have been out of the game a little while.
Yeah.
And then get thrust back into it. And this is a great
It's like a fine wine, Greg, though. It really ages well. It's okay.
It does. It does. Kepler, where can people find you? Where can they order the book? How do they get in contact with you if they have questions?
Sure. Thank you for asking. So the book is Raising Tomorrow, Talks to Prepare Our Kids for What Lies Ahead. There's a website, which is where I would go first. It's www.raisingtomorrow.org. You can download portions of the book. There are reviews on there, or if they're not there yet, they're coming. We've done a bunch of podcasts, and the book's not been out too long. There's a Facebook group page, which I tend to use my personal. I'm not, per my prior lamentations, not a huge social media guy, but there is a Facebook group page. But the website's probably the best place to go to learn more about it, what's interesting, what might inspire certain conversations. And then the book is also, obviously, it's available on Amazon and it'll be out on some other platforms soon. But you can get to the book from the website property.
Awesome. And I'll be sure to put those links into the show notes.
Thank you.
As well, so everybody can get a hold of you. Kepler, thank you so much for being on the Cool Grandpa podcast. Please come back and let's catch up a little bit down the road.
We should have this conversation in 10 years, like Bill Gates said, and see what happened, right?
I'll need it because my granddaughters are going to be right in where you're right. Talking about.
Crazy. Thank you so much for having me, Greg. I really appreciate it. It's been a real pleasure, and it's been very nice talking to you. Thanks again.
Kepler and I had a blast on this podcast, in case you couldn't tell. We really hit it off, and I really appreciated getting his perspective as a father, bringing up two girls in this environment. And I mean, every grandparent, every parent since the world started spinning has always had questions and has had difficulties raising kids in, quote, this environment. But I think the speed of technology, the speed of change that's going on is something that as humans, we haven't really seen before. So people like Kepler who can sit down, make easy, digestible, really nutritious, intellectual morsels for us. And boy, that's a mouthful I just said. Really helps to simplify the complicated. And it's a great way to start conversations with your children, your grandchildren, your nieces and nephews, all those people that you care about in your family. So I hope you go out. I hope you get connected with Kepler. I hope you get the book, Raising Tomorrow, Talks to Prepare Our Kids for What Lies Ahead. And again, I'm holding up the book if you're watching this on YouTube. And please check it out. It's an easy read. You don't need to read these chapters sequentially. Pick out whatever's the topic in your household and give that chapter a read. Give it to the kids to read, and then have a great discussion around it. So check out the show notes. I've got a couple of call to action items in there for fathers and grandfathers. We've also got the links so that you can connect with Kepler, you can order the book, and that you can really engage in the conversation with tomorrow's youth. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I can't believe this is episode 250. I didn't point that out at the beginning, but 250, when you think about these podcasts that you listen to, whoever it is, depending on the release schedule, typically every 50 is going to represent a week's worth of time within the year. So at 250, the Cool Grandpa podcast is really kind of turning 6 years old. And I've been excited to be on this journey with you. I hope we continue it together, and be sure to spread the news about how important you are as a grandfather and how important grandfathers have been in your life if you've had that opportunity. Enough talk from me. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Reach out to Kepler, and until next time, remember to stay cool.